Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar event, Here You Can Belong, NBC Sports Career Showcase, hosted by the National Association of Black Journalists and NBC Sports. This panel and Q&A will give NABJ members the opportunity to hear firsthand about breaking into the sports media industry, as well as discussion regarding career journeys and experiences and perspectives on inclusion and belonging within NBC Sports. I'm your moderator, Marvin Pittman. I work here as Manager, Content Integration, and Story Editor at NBC Sports, where I have worked since 2013. I also am the co-lead of the Stamford, Connecticut chapter of the Black Employee Network at NBC Universal, and my roots with NABJ actually begin in my hometown of Philadelphia with NABJ's founding chapter, the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, and I've attended a few NABJ conventions as well over the years. And here is our slideshow. We have begun. NBC Sports serves sports fans 24/7 with premier live events, insightful studio shows, and compelling original programming. And here we value integrity, creativity, teamwork, ownership, pioneering spirit, and inclusivity. And our mission is to make big events bigger, to innovate, to make playing sports better, and to reach passionate sports fans everywhere, to connect people to the moments that matter most. NBC Sports currently produces more than 350 shows and sports properties with over 30,000 programming hours in 2020 alone. Now, before NBC Universal's merger with Comcast in 2011, NBC had just 600 hours of programming a year. And we've spent more than $38 billion in sports rights since 2011. NBC Sports possesses an unparalleled collection of media rights agreements, partnering with some of the most prestigious sports properties in the world, including the International Olympic Committee, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the NFL, NASCAR, IndyCar, Roland Garros, the Tour de France, Premier League soccer. You see the big list there. And we're on cable, we're on broadcast, and increasingly on streaming and digital, from our many talk shows on Peacock to our newly launched NBC Sports Next team, providing a host of direct-to-consumer products in youth and recreational sports, golf, and of course, big in the news now, betting, gaming, and emerging media such as Sports Engine, Golf Now, and NBC Sports Edge. And from a full company standpoint, Comcast and NBC Universal have so many assets that we are able to reach 95% of the country every month. And this gives us a great marketing advantage, and we're able to make big events bigger. Now, some housekeeping notes before we begin this panel. This webinar is being recorded right now, and it will live on in perpetuity on NABJ's YouTube page. And thanks again to NABJ and NBC Sports. And this conversation among the panelists here will go on for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A. And you can see on the bottom of your Zoom screen there that there's a chat button and there's a Q&A button. The chat button is where you can talk up a storm and leave commentary and all those fun things, while the Q&A button is there, and that is where you will please post your questions in that Q&A box rather than the chat box. Introducing tonight's panelists, we have among us Emilia Costa, Manager, Editorial Integration and Story Editor, Jared Sumner, Senior Associate Producer, and Ron Vaccaro, VP Editorial Content. Welcome to our panelists. Great to have you here. And before we get into all the nitty-gritty career stuff, can you tell us a bit about yourselves? You know, a hometown and a brief description of your professional journey to where you are now at NBC Sports. Let's start with Emilia.
Thanks, Marvin, and thanks to the NABJ for having all of us as guests for this webinar. Really thrilled to be here. My name is Emilia Costa. As Marvin said, I'm from Chicago, Illinois, best city in the United States. I started with NBC about 7 years ago through the NBC Page program. It's an early career program for recent graduates, and it was a really amazing experience. And it's so funny to look back and think about that as my launching point in NBC. I worked there for about 6 months, moved into a full-time role at NBC News, and made the move over to NBC Sports about 4 years ago with the editorial research team. So I'm kind of working my way through the Peacock, and I'm very happy to have found a home at sports.
Thank you, Emilia. Jared?
Hey everyone, my name is Jared Sumner. I'm a senior AP at NBC Sports, originally from Union, New Jersey, went to Union High School, graduated in 2009, then went to Rutgers University, graduated in 2013, where I studied journalism. While at Rutgers, I interned at NBC Sports, and that was my first time getting my foot in the door. And I've pretty much been here ever since. Right after graduating, I got a role as a program integration coordinator, which essentially you just work at the intersection of production and marketing and sales. And then the production bug bit me, so transitioned into being a production assistant for a couple years and worked my way up from there to associate producer and now senior AP.
Excellent. And Ron?
Thank you, Marvin. Ron Vaccaro. I started 17 years and 4 days short of 5 months ago. I was an Olympics research assistant, though I was neither a research assistant or an Olympics assistant. I was assistant to the executive vice president for Olympic programming. So I was more accurately a programming assistant, but worked my way through research. And then over the years, Marvin, you took us through the advancement of NBC Universal as Comcast has gotten involved in the way the sports tonnage has grown, and have been able to build out an editorial unit to go along with that from some core building blocks, and hopefully can find ways to keep innovating. I'm from Ansonia, Connecticut. That's where I'm coming to you from now. I had a short stint in New York for 4 years, and my heart is always in warmer weather, but for now, Ansonia, Connecticut will do.
Yeah, we're just at the start of this cold weather bit, but we'll all get through it together because, of course, we have the Winter Olympics coming up. So that's always a good thing. If you all could explain a bit of what your day-to-day work is like and how has it changed since the COVID pandemic began? And we'll start with Jared.
Yeah, day-to-day as an associate producer is pretty different depending on what property you're working on, what event you're doing. I'd say everything breaks down whether it's a prep day for you or whether it's a remote. If you're traveling, everything sort of changes. Typically, if you're doing a remote event, you travel out a couple days before, have a few set days, and then once you hit air, it's just a whirlwind the whole time. Outside of that, if you're doing something up in the studio, it's a little bit more, you can kind of take your time when you're prepping, you kind of look ahead. The prep work is the one thing that has totally changed during COVID. It used to be, you were in the office 5 days a week, regardless of what you were working on. You were there all the time for meetings or whatever. Now everyone kind of sees, between Teams and Zoom, we can be just as productive, not face-to-face. And, there's still value in that collaboration, value in being face-to-face, but for production where you're traveling so much, it's kind of nice to, if I'm off, be at home. And a lot of times going to the office was really just to show face. So now it's, you have that work-life balance back a little bit where you can stay at home and still do your job just as well as you were before.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And Emilia, same question to you.
Yeah, so I work on the editorial research team. Hopefully I'm pointing the right way, but Ron is actually my boss. Every day, I think for just about every department at NBC Sports looks a little bit different. It sounds cliched to say. I'm involved in a couple different properties. Primarily, I work on our football research team. I'm involved in our Olympic research prep and coverage, and I work on a lot of our digital endeavors, which is a lot of fun for me. So every day involves, meetings, it involves writing, it involves kind of finding that balance between being an individual contributor and getting my work done and kind of helping with the management side of our team. And as far as changes from the COVID-19 pandemic and work from home, I'm, along the same lines of Jared, I really appreciate that flexibility. This is not my home. This is the offices of 30 Rock. So I am on the flexible side of coming in today, which is, kind of something that we're easing back into as we kind of find the right balance between working from home and being in the office. Mainly, I like the access to an industrial printer, which I don't have at home. So I kind of trying to find the right balance on a given week. But I think the biggest thing that's changed for me and that I kind of try to be cognizant of is that communication just looks very different. I used to be able to walk down the aisle and talk to somebody that I needed an answer from. And that kind of casual conversation is now often replaced by calls or emails, and you lose some of that sort of in-person fluency. So kind of find the way to just keep that communication open and make sure that you're maintaining those good relationships with your coworkers, even if you're not sitting, a few desks away from them, has been really important to me and something that I've tried to be really cognizant of with kind of this hybrid work from home, work from office. Who knows where anyone might be on a given day.
Yes, without being all in the office together, it's like we're even more reliant on text and email and all those things. And that makes me think of Ron, in your position as VP of editorial content. You've got your hands on so many different properties and shows, some while they're live on the air, and it involves, I imagine, a lot of telling people what to do. What is managing in COVID been like for you?
Well, I echo a lot of what Jared and Emilia observed about this period. And I think the biggest thing is to build on that. I have a hard time sitting still. And if we did this thing long enough, that would probably come through the screen. So I would always be kind of up and about and just talking in like the bullpen area with the team, and sometimes about serious stuff, sometimes about, just kicking the tires on things. Hey, what's curious? But the biggest thing is not only has it been COVID, but we are still in, a period in time that for many reasons, I think is going to be studied and is going to be its own era. And we're still like maybe 19, 20 months into it. So I say that because I think to manage effectively, yes, it's a lot of times, okay, how are we going to cover this? What are we going to do? But that's secondary to, are you supporting your people well enough? And you got to be self-critical on that question. And when the team is sitting in front of you, you could do a pretty good job of knowing if you're doing a good job or not on supporting your people, because it's on their faces a lot of the time, or it's in their body language some other way, or they'll just come into your office and tell you that you're not doing a good job of it. It's a lot harder to do that now. It takes much more intentionality, much more. I've found myself over the past several months sometimes writing notes. Okay, I'm going to call this person today just to check in. And yet even that is a mental struggle for me, because it's like, oh my God, we've got Teams or Zoom fatigue. Does this person need me to check in? Am I checking in? Am I adding to stress or am I reducing stress? And you don't know. So I still don't have a good handle on that, but I've tried to err on the side of the check-in as opposed to not, but that's the toughest part for me.
Yes, in this age of Zoom and Teams, and here we are on Zoom right now, I've come to appreciate the phone call in a very different way of being able to, it just makes things a little different right now than always being on camera. We are not on camera talent, people, but now everyone is on camera. Now, speaking of which, you may notice here, no one here works in front of the camera. And from the personal experience, however, many people from outside of our business that I talk to are aware of only the on-camera talent. Now, what reactions do you all get when you're telling people that you work at NBC Sports versus describing what your job actually is? Let's start with Emilia.
That's such a great question. And I always joke that my dad, God love him, could not tell you what I do for work if you paid him $1 million. It just doesn't compute. But he loves the concept of NBC Sports, and he knows the name, and he knows, a little bit. He's learning. But I think, working in TV or working in sports is such a sort of a dream concept for so many people. It certainly was a dream concept for me. I went to a school that didn't have a journalism program or a communications program. So most of my journalism experience was extracurricular. And I think I felt like I had some catching up to do in some areas. And then there were some areas where I kind of felt more rock solid. But the learning curve and experience for me has been enormous in terms of everything that's out there. And I think even, when I try to get into the nitty gritty details of what I do with friends that don't work in TV or don't have that background, it's always sort of such an eye opener to them. Just because you see television and if we're doing our jobs right, it looks really slick and it looks like it doesn't take that much effort. But every second of on camera, especially live TV, requires so many people to make it look so seamless. So I think, a really exciting thing for me has just been learning all of these different avenues and jobs and responsibilities that go into making something that looks quick, that looks like it takes, 15 seconds of transition and camera work and music is just a real ballet, not to be too self-serious, but it's really fun and cool just to see all of the different smart people who put their heads together to make a minute of TV happen and look seamless and natural.
Yes, and Jared, you're a control room man. You were there in the control room doing what you do. How do people react to you when you talk about, hey, I work at NBC Sports, and then you have to say, well, this is what my job actually is there?
Yeah, honestly, I try not to even go into it because it's so hard to explain half the times. But a lot of people I talk to say, oh, I work in sports TV. Like, oh, you work at ESPN. I'm like, no, I work at NBC Sports, and try to explain, exactly what we have and what we do. I think the struggle really is that you can be a production assistant or an AP or senior AP or anything, or even you get to level producer director. That doesn't mean you only do those roles. You do everything that, comes with that. So I guess the typical path would be to start out as a graphics PA on a show where you're only worried about what you read on screen, any graphics. Then you move up to maybe an edit PA where you're cutting stuff in the edit and NABJ. Go up to tape producing where you're responsible, if it's a live event, you're doing replays or features or cutting highlights. Associate director, you're focused on the timings of the show and making sure the show stays on format. And then, as a producer or director, the director is really focused on what the show looks like, how it's presented, and then the producer oversees sort of the content and the editorial of the show. That's my best way to summarize, the production team. But along with those people, there's hundreds of people who support us. Like, just personal experience. One of my main roles is NASCAR. I didn't know the first thing about NASCAR when I started working on it, but there's people like Ron's team and Emilia who support us and will tell you exactly, hey, this is what you need to do. This is how it's done. And then it's up to you to sort of present those ideas behind the scenes. And then also to make sure you're on-air talent, because at the end of the day, the on-air talent are the ones who sort of, they're the most visible, but we're also there to support them and make sure they, come across like they know exactly what they are, because they more times than not are experts, but they need as much help as the rest of us. So it's my best way to sort of summarize it. I hope that helped, but probably not.
Yes, I always think of TV as you see the people that are on camera, and it's like they're at like the top of this pyramid, that there's all these armies of people that are sort of holding all of that up, that is in each wave is supporting the next wave to get to what you see on the air. And the way that you described that, I think very much encapsulates that. And seeing in the chat talking about live television and the teams and how many things that it requires, we're not just talking about television anymore. Some of the television we make does not appear on a television at all. Increasingly, we're talking about what we make simply as content, whether it's written, whether it's social media, whether it's digital, whether it's linear TV that you turn on your box and there it is, or direct to consumer, and all these different buzzwords and terms that are out there in this increasingly flattening and shrinking landscape where we're all fighting for territory. And it made me think about how NBC Sports is known heavily for Sunday Night Football and the Olympics and Paralympics on television, but there's this vast portfolio of properties and content platforms, and each of us don't even know them all. Like I saw that slide, that's like one of 3 times I've ever seen a slide with everything that we have on it. But how does that relate to working here? How does that diversity of content influence the potential diversity of employees and paths to advancement? Ron, can you field that one for us?
Thank you. One of my passion points is I think it's really twofold, and it's on the one hand, how does it increase diversity? Well, when you have a job opening, I have found that you will get applicants, and my job openings with rare defined exceptions where like you just need someone to write articles about a certain sport and be on, let's say, an NHL beat. But with rare exception, like the editorial research team, pre-existing expertise is not a prerequisite. It certainly helps, but I'm rather adamant that it's not a prerequisite. But you do get generally people who are interested in general in the sports and the properties you have. So each sport, each thing on that slide has a slightly different or a vastly different demographic. There are a range of demographics that the data shows are fans of certain sports. And we've got plenty across the spectrum, even among Olympic sports versus, regular non-Olympic sports. So I think it allows a wider net on the entry point, but that alone is not going to increase diversity. It's what you do once you've got the people in. And I think the opportunity to work on different properties. I hired someone 9 years ago, as a researcher. And then 3 weeks later, we acquired the rights to the Premier League. Well, guess what? That person I hired, having no idea we were going to get the Premier League, became our Premier League researcher. So they had to learn about an entirely foreign league. And that certainly diversified their way of thinking and who they were as a person. So, and one, example I like to give, and Emilia has heard me say it because it's one of my kind of back when I was a kid, walked to school uphill both ways stories. But, in the fall of 2008, I became an Olympic researcher, about 15 months until the Vancouver Olympics. And I was assigned the sport of Nordic combined. And I tell you not, I was on NBC's staff for 4 years before that point. And when I was an Olympic researcher and assigned the sport of Nordic combined, I still could not tell you what 2 disciplines made up the sport of Nordic combined. But over the next 15 months, I figured it out, and I probably knew more about Nordic combined, not only than anyone else at NBC, but anyone else in North American journalism, because it just wasn't a popular North American sport. I say that because the process of learning about that and talking with people, like that was one of the great growth experiences of my career, to be thrown into knowing nothing about something and have to become expert at it quickly. So I think, Marvin, we're so lucky to have such a sampling. And on top of that, there's really a culture of raising your hand. Hey, I'd like to learn more about this. I've not found a single person who's a steward of one of those properties who wouldn't take a meeting with someone who wanted to learn more about that sport or that event, even if they weren't working on it. And I think that really helps too.
Yes, thank you for that. And Emilia, going to you, talking about that diversity of content, talking about the diversity of employees, paths to advancement. As you said, you've been working your way through the NBC machine, as it were. And for you, how have you seen working in a company this large with its hands in basically any kind of media that you could want? How have you seen that interplay with your own career?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming from news and starting in news, and I'll give a tiny pitch, which is that I started as an assistant. And I think sometimes people think being an assistant is beneath them or is, not the right stepping stone, and you have to find the right fit, and you have to find someone who, wants to advocate for you and help you advance. But I loved being an assistant. I learned so much as an assistant that I use every single day now that I'm a manager. And I think, again, if you find the right fit, it can be a really, really great learning experience and a way to learn a lot about a company and how it operates and really how the sausage is made. But I have loved kind of being able to experience these two very different, but also intersecting kind of elements of NBC Sports. Sports is news. News is often sports. And, we don't interact every day, but I think having that news hat on and approaching, the questions of the day or the coverage of the day and thinking about how we can be the most accurate, how we can provide the best context, how we can involve the most, nuanced and explanatory voices. That's what news does. That's what sports research does as well. So I think those skill sets really go hand in hand. And I think I hope I brought a unique perspective to the sports team coming from the world of news. And I think, being able to have those resources and those different arms of operation, really helps us to make those big events even bigger. To go back to that, initial slide, I go back to week 4 of the NFL season this year when, Tom Brady made his return to Foxborough, and that was all over the NBC Universal kind of portfolio. And that gave us the opportunity to take a game that, early in the season, not a playoff game, but to treat it like a spectacle. And that was a really fun thing to do that was kind of really enabled by the size and depth of NBC Universal. So I feel very lucky to have had those kind of different areas of experience. And I think it's definitely an asset in terms of how we cover things.
I think of that week 4 game and hearing roundly that us telling the story about Tom Brady going back to New England was better than the game was. So, the storytelling really counts for a lot. And especially even the commercial with that use of the Adele song really, really sold it for all of us. And Jared, talking about the storytelling and the reporting and all that sort of stuff, you came into the business as a real sports freak, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things, just personally, I wanted to get to NBC because my earliest sports memories are like Michael Jordan playing on NBA on NBC and, the round ball rock theme and everything. So my background really is sports first and then television second. And I think that's true for a lot of people here. A lot of people are just, straight up and down, just sports junkies, and that's all they want to do. And that's why they're here. But a lot of people do have different backgrounds. You might have a news background, or you might have a journalism, writing background, or you might know everything there is to know about news TV, but not know anything about sports. But you kind of need all those people on a production team to bring something different to the table. I know for me, when you were talking about like the diversity of the portfolio and everything, we don't have the NBA. I would kill work on the NBA, but we don't have it. But something that we do have is A10 basketball on NBC. And I don't think many people know that we have that, but that's a property that I raise my hand, right away. And that's something that I work on a ton, in addition to, the Olympics or Football Night in America or the Indy 500. Which are huge events, but I still give the same dedication to something like A10 on NBC, or next couple weeks from now I'm doing the Grambling versus Southern game, the Bayou Classic in New Orleans, and it's things like that where a lot of people might not know that NBC has these properties, but if we do our job marketing them and then ultimately putting on a good broadcast, it kind of exemplifies those a little bit. So I think all in all, that's sort of my favorite thing about TV is there are those events that are small, but you make NBC, we always say, oh, NBC makes big events bigger. We also make the smaller events bigger. So that's my NBC pitch for you.
Yes, I remember when the presidents of Southern and Grambling would come to campus. This is, of course, in the before times, and seeing them walking around and seeing on their faces the idea of yeah, we've hit the big time here, and but also being able to sit at my desk and see them walk past and they gave me a nod and I give them a nod back. And that was a nice moment to have. Talking about all of the different ways that you have the sports passionate people, you have the news passionate people. Bringing Ron into the mix here, as a 14-year veteran in this, and I've been in this business as well for about 15, 16 years. What are some of the ways in which you've seen the culture of sports reporting and storytelling change during your career, Ron?
I think one of them is there's even more of a premium on curiosity. What's the angle that's just maybe 10 or 15 degrees off of what like the top news thing is? How are you going to differentiate? And I think the curiosity that people bring and asking of questions, and I'm maybe self-selecting as the way I answer that, because that's certainly what we look for is, okay, what is some meaningful analysis? What does this mean? What might it mean? What is at stake? And I think that's at even more of a premium. And I value it even more now, maybe than 10, 15, 17 years ago, because there's also the temptation, and it's rampant, of, oh, something gets tweeted or something even gets posted somewhere. And then it's a race to attract clicks. And do not stop, do not fact check, just post, get your clicks. And that happens every day. And it really takes an incredible amount of discipline to say, hey, wait a minute, what's really going on here? And sometimes, I mean, it's going to sound silly, but the Aaron Rodgers doppelganger in California story from this week, even though it was debunked relatively quickly, it was still a distraction from real stories that were going on because people had to stop down to do the debunking. But it can happen on surface layer stuff or deeper context stuff. So I think it's harder and the pressures are greater because clicks do matter. We are a business. We are a for-profit business that is expected to return a profit. And at the same time, we have to be journalistically sound. And that's an and, not a but, because both can happen and coexist. And I think the key is just really being disciplined and supporting people who are trying to do that. And sometimes you'll find out details that back up what the narrative is, and you'll make the story richer. And other times you'll find things that maybe are against the narrative or don't quite fit, and they're complicating things. So it really, to me, I think to give a short button on it, I think it's really story advancement, I think is at a higher premium than ever in whatever form that takes each time.
Yes, it's sort of that idea of what is really happening and who is really here, and so that you can get to the bottom of why something's important. I often tell people working in sports media that, and this is a newspaper analogy because that's where I started in the business, was that sports is the section of the paper where you can put every other section of the paper through it. We have health and medicine, we have crime and courts, we have politics, we have gender, we have race, we have social policy. All these things all fit through the world of sports. And the more that we're able to talk about all those things in the world and how they happen in sports too, I think the richer we get with the content that we're able to make. So with that, having this career panel discussion with NABJ, I think we'd be remiss in this discussion not to talk a bit about imposter syndrome, the feelings of self-doubt or perceived incompetence, and that can persist with folks, especially people of color and women and other underrepresented groups within a large business such as this. And Emilia and Jared, what are your experiences with imposter syndrome, and how have you worked through it or overcome it in your careers? I'll start with you, Jared.
Imposter syndrome in my career. It's something that I think I deal with every single day, especially working certain events that, like I said, with NASCAR, I may not have had a background in to begin with. So the thing to remember though is as you go through, because you do know at the end of the day, you do know what you're talking about, and you know how to you know how to produce or direct, you know how to get these things done. I think with imposter syndrome, everyone, especially starting out early, everyone's going to deal with that. But especially production, it's talking about Twitter before, like any mistake, knowing that you know, you can sort of work through that, and you know, you can work through those things and get to the end of you know, reach your end goals at the end of the day is what's most important. Also, another thing with imposter syndrome is everyone's not going to start out knowing how to produce or do that. That path is faster to get promoted before me. Why is this person producing or directing and I'm not? Every path is different. Everything's going to take patience, you know, takes patience to get to where you want to go.
Yes, thank you for that answer, Emilia.
Yeah, I'll absolutely echo Jared in that it's something that I deal with every day. I dealt with before joining this panel. It's like, why do they want me on this panel? What do I know? But I think a big thing for me, especially when I first started at sports, you know, looking around and not seeing a lot of people who maybe look like me, and not seeing a lot of women of color, and seeing a kind of a different sort of person generally on my team, I think my first instinct was, how can I be more like the people I already see succeeding at this endeavor? How can I change about myself what is lacking and be more like the people that I, you know, already see succeeding on my team? And I think it took me a while, and I'm still working on it, but I realized that, you know, I wasn't hired because they already have 2 people on the team who do this job and they want me to do it the same way. I was hired because I have unique skills and I have a unique way of thinking about things, and I am who I am. And I think, you know, it takes a while to have the confidence to lean into your strengths as opposed to, you know, shying away from your weaknesses. But I think that that's what I think about every day, is that you bring something to the table just by being you, even if it doesn't look the same as what everybody else brings to the table. So I'm constantly reminding myself that. I'm constantly reminding myself to have that confident hat on. But I think it's not easy. And I think, you know, self-doubt is always going to be there. So I think I just always try to remind myself, you know what your strengths are, you know what your weaknesses are too, but hey, you know what your strengths are, lean into those, embrace those are what make you special. And that, you know, is half the battle, and more than half of the battle, because, you know, those weaknesses will be there and you can work on them, but you can also really work on sort of emphasizing your strengths and bringing that to the table.
Yes, it's that idea of turning the self-doubt into self-awareness. And for me, it's also about avoiding the prison of perfection. And, you know, you think of, for so many of us, especially people of color who are working in this business or other corporate atmospheres, there's often sort of this straight and narrow path that we're supposed to be on. And this idea of having to be twice as good and work twice as hard. And sometimes that creates this prison of perfection, and that you can't make a step otherwise. And being able to let go of that, because making mistakes is just a part of being human and a part of doing this in life. So thank you for those answers, Jared and Emilia. And for Ron, how can managers, many, if not most of whom are going to be white, straight, and male in this business, how can they help diverse employees with imposter syndrome? And how do a company's DEI efforts often come down to just proper people management?
I can go on for the next hour about that, but let me try and keep it relatively brief, but specific and cogent. I think number one is you've got to be empathetic and be capable of having empathy and caring about people. And that'll help you see, I think, around a lot of corners and support everyone and meet everyone where they need to be met. I think it's also important to be objective and to be clear in expectations and set objective, specific standards so that it's not a guessing game what it takes to get ahead. Now, sometimes in doing that, the standard can be so high that it can reinforce some of the stresses that come along with imposter syndrome. So it's really important to go back to that first thing of empathy and care about the human and put that first. And I think Marvin, and I'm going to give you a lot of credit here because you're one of the people who've said it so often and so well about even our sports coverage, right? We cover humans, not athletes. And, we work with humans, not employees, reports, we work with humans. And yes, we all have a different dynamic, but how do we best support each other? I think that mindset would help. And then I would say, if that is done right, and it's done right tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, then the premise of your question, if we do this 10 years from now, might change also, and that would be a real win.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those answers. Let's go ahead and get into some of the Q&A here. We have a question from Craig Brown here, and it's a question for Jared. What skills would you recommend an individual master in hopes of one day becoming an associate producer?
The biggest one is just to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because most situations you're going to be in are foreign. No one, what are you going to do in a situation where you have to build a graphic on the fly or something like that? It's something that you would have never really thought about until you're, put in that position. The second thing is don't be afraid to speak up. The biggest thing in production, the people who go the furthest in the production are the people who present ideas and always have something to bring to the table. So a lot of times you'll see a PA who starts out and it's like they're very quiet in meeting rooms and just won't, present anything. And it's sort of like, well, even if no idea is bad at the end of the day in a production meeting, that's where you're supposed to just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So I think those two biggest things, just, knowing that you're not always going to have the answers, but knowing to rely on people around you who do have the answers. And then also just being vocal and speaking up and just presenting, like I was saying before, you got to this point because your skills, don't step away from what you know now that you're there.
Yes, and another question from Josh Crawford. Josh says, as an upcoming senior graduate, how do I manage my desire to be an on-air personality with having to come into a company like an NBC Sports or an ESPN as a PA or an assistant?
I'll jump in on this one. And I think my job at News was in the on-air talent development team. So I think one of the biggest things that I took away from that is the on-camera is a very specific skill set. It's, you're going to learn all of those skills. Foundationally, if you know how to write, if you know how a control room works, if you've, had experience building graphics, if you have that background understanding of what's happening to make TV, you are 100% going to be a better on-air reporter or, commentator, host, whatever it might be. And I think, the other thing is that this business is really built on relationships and connecting with people, meeting people, being a sponge of information for people who maybe aren't on air, but have worked with a lot of on-air talent. And those sort of production assistant roles and that exposure and those connections are going to be key towards kind of moving you forward in whatever trajectory you're interested in, if it's behind the camera or in front of the camera. there's no skill set or no skill that it's not valuable to learn, even if it doesn't end up being what you do full time. So I think that, a PA is in a really unique position to just absorb all of these different parts of the business and get a lot of exposure and information. And I think that's always going to be essential, regardless of where you go in your career. So I think it's just, that balance is key, but on-air skills are only made stronger by your abilities and awareness of what happens behind the camera.
Thank you. And this is a question from Naeem Thomas. I think we'll send this one toward Ron. Working for companies such as NBC Universal / NBC Sports, there seems to be an emphasis on diversity and growth. How are opportunities presented for up and coming talent or new hires to grow within such a large company?
Thank you for that question. I think the answer to that is more exciting now than it would have been 5 years ago, and probably not as exciting as it will be 5 years from now, if I can give an optimistic view of things, because we're in an industry, let alone the company, we're in an industry that is under an amazing amount of disruption right now. And that creates a certain amount of chaos. And with chaos comes opportunity. There are roles that are on teams right now that probably, certainly didn't exist 10 years ago. And some that were, like 5 years ago or so, we started having, we called them digital embeds, like on the production teams. And now, that started as like oh, wow, it'd really be cool to have someone from digital sit in this production group. And now there's like there's an entire slew of jobs under that category, digital linear editors and producers. And I say that because those are opportunities that were iterative of themselves. Like they arose from below, from the culture of needing, hey, we need these roles. And I think it really can be a good, productive cycle. The more diverse you are in your thinking as you're hiring a workforce and training a workforce and sharpening the skill sets, you're only going to come up with more ideas about the type of roles you actually need. And I think that's what you need to beat your competitors. Because again, it is about creating the most compelling content that people are going to want to have some stickiness to it. So I think it's shame on anyone who isn't thinking about, do we even have the right roles right now? Do we have the right people doing that? I think it's got to be kind of a constant gut check. And sometimes it's going to be hedging your bet and taking some calculated small risks or big risks, but hopefully risks that won't sink the whole enterprise. But in terms of that, I think that's an environment where a lot of that opportunity can come from. And I think that's where we're headed right now. On the good side, the bar to get a good idea to execution is lower than it's ever been, excuse me, in terms of technology. The pandemic proved that. And now the space is there, because as Marvin was saying, digital opens up so many opportunities. So I think the key is making sure that you do all that with some order and logic to it and not haphazardly. And I think we're on a solid start to that.
Yes, and here's a question from Tess Quinlan. She writes here, to build off Ron's point about curiosity, and this one's for Emilia and Jared, what qualities do you look for in a potential direct report or teammate?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think something that is super prevalent in a truck or in a control room is you have to get along with people. Like you have to manage. A lot of times if you're directing, you need to work hand in hand with your technical director for the show to even get on air. So a lot of it is, it's not only that, the technical expertise, it's can I go and sit in a room with this person for 12 straight hours and, put a show on air? I'm sure it's important in most jobs, but I know from my experience in live TV, the the biggest issues that happen on air are because of stuff that happens behind the scenes and has nothing to do with the show at all. Only has to do with the personalities of the two people who are supposed to be working together. So you have to be someone who can just roll with the punches and not, for one, not take yourself too seriously, but also not, you see it all, the old mentality in TV production was you had producers and directors who were screaming at people and getting on people. And throughout the years, that has changed a lot, where a lot of times, like, you yell at someone, they're going to shut down for the rest of the show. They're not going to be able to do their job as well as before. So now it's sort of everyone's taking a step back. And I think that might be something that came out of the pandemic as well, is a lot of people took a step back and were like, look, we're not doing brain surgery. We're here working on sports. Like, this is fun. This is enjoyable. So that's something, I had to learn. And I think a lot of people around us have to learn, but it's, hey, don't take yourself too seriously. This person is only here to make the show better. So that's, what I would look for in someone that I'm working with.
Yeah, I think, I know we're coming close to time. So all I'll add is that I just always rather have a coworker who says, I don't understand this and I need your help, rather than someone who wants to just do it all themselves. There are often individual assignments that we work on, but there's nothing that we can put on the air alone. So I think that humility to just say, I need help today. I know you'll probably need help tomorrow. I think makes for some of my best coworkers and some of my best friends at work as well.
Thank you. And we're going to try to get to one more question or so here as we start to wrap up. There's a question here about positions within NBC Sports. I can field that one very quickly. There's one website. It's where all the jobs are. Trust me, it's where they are. They don't keep a secret one. It's NBCUniCareers.com. And you go there and all the jobs are there. And it can help if you know someone who works there who might be able to get some information about the hiring manager. And guess what? Y'all all now know us. So there you go. You're already found a way in. So that's a quick answer to that. And I would say as we start to come to a close here, just you can take this in the direction of networking. You can take this in a direction of just how you have moved through your career. But what is one piece of practical advice that you would give? And I'll start with Emilia.
My piece of practical advice is specifically for the women and female identifying people on the call. I think that, I can only speak for myself, and I anecdotally can speak for talking with other women in this industry. There is a hesitation a lot of the times, I think, to advocate for yourself, and you will be lucky to find mentors and people who employ you, who advocate for you. Ron has been a wonderful advocate for me, but you also have to advocate for yourself and think about it as an expectation in this business. You're not sports, and working in TV is often thought of as a dream career. And it is, it's really exciting, but at the same time, it's a career, and it's one where the expectation is going to be that you need to push for yourself, and don't be hesitant, don't be shy to do that. You're never going to offend someone or be asking for too much. You have to ask, whether it's for more pay or a higher title or whatever it is. Just have that confidence to advocate for yourself. And you're not doing the wrong thing. You're doing the right thing. And it'll be worth it in the long run.
And Jared.
Yeah, I totally echo that too. It's one thing I take away from what Emilia just said is you have to have mentors and people you can talk to in this industry to get anywhere. Especially here, I look around, there's not that many Black men or just Black people in general at this level in broadcast television, especially Black women. I don't see many of them at all, not only at NBC, but across the board. So I know for me, whenever I come across another Black person in sports TV, I instantly talk to them and reach out to them. And I have mentors that not only at NBC, but CBS, Fox, all over the spectrum. So you cannot be shy when it comes to those things. If you've never met someone, you can reach out, you can email them, you can text them. There's so many ways to get in contact with people. LinkedIn, anyone on this call, feel free to message me on LinkedIn. I will reply immediately. So that's the one thing I got is you just really have to be adamant about reaching out to people.
Yes, very much so. Because anybody you meet, you never know when you're going to run into them again. When I applied for a job at NBC after working at ESPN, one of the people who interviewed me was a former coordinating producer of college basketball over there by the name of Dan Steer. And I walk into his office and he saw me and I saw him, and it was like, oh, he's going to straight up ask me why I want to leave there to come here because he just did that. So those things definitely matter. You never know who you're going to run into again, whether on the way up or the way down. So Ron, if you can give us just one piece of practical advice that you have for working in this business.
I'm going to do two, and I'm going to do it quick. Number one, communicate. To Jared's point earlier, very often is communication is very often the problem, not actual merits of a topic. So no surprises is an outstanding rule to follow once you land that job. And good communication skills show even in the interview process and how you handle every part of it. And the second thing is, whether it's interviewing or whether it's once you've got the job, take care of yourself, go easy on yourself, and don't forget to take a deep breath and, find time to relax and just trust in yourself, trust in things. It can be an absolutely relentless grind. Take easy on yourself when you need to, and don't never apologize for doing that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all of that advice. And we're coming up to time here. So I just want to thank everyone for attending, for coming out to this panel, and for hearing more about NBC Sports and what we do here, and hearing a few stories about people's paths through the company here. So we appreciate being here. Thank you to NABJ. Thank you for all that you do. And please feel free to contact the NABJ webinar team at webinar@nabj.org if you have any questions. You can find all of us on LinkedIn. You have our names, you have our job titles. Find us on LinkedIn. We will talk. Knowing people is such a good part of this, and kindness is an important part of just doing things in life and doing things in this job. So thank you all for joining today's webinar. NABJ offers year-round training, development, and networking opportunities. And if you are not already an active member, please join the family or renew your membership at NABJ online. Thank you and take care.